The expansion of renewables is in full swing, creating unparalleled opportunities for economic growth and social progress. But to build, maintain and manage the growing renewables infrastructure, we need to more than triple the actual workforce by 2030. We need all hands on deck, retrained workers from the fossil sector, as well as new, diverse talents. Can an intersectional approach help to cultivate a skilled workforce while harnessing the benefits of inclusive teams to drive a just energy transition?
And that is our topic in this final plenary of the 11th Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. Welcome back, everybody. Great to have you with us. The demand for skilled workers in the renewable energy sector is going to surge if we take serious steps to realize our tripling up pledge in the next 5 years. IRENA estimates that we will need 38 million skilled workers by 2030 and at least 43 million by 2050. And with many developed economies facing demographic challenges and shrinking labor forces, in these countries, retraining workers will become crucial. And both in developed economies and in emerging markets and developing economies, workforce diversity and inclusion will also be absolutely essential to attract the needed talent into the renewable energy sector. So this panel wants to explore strategies for ensuring a renewable energy workforce that is sufficient to meet our ambitious goals and that is economically and socially resilient. We're going to be asking how policymakers, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector can all work together to dismantle barriers at the intersections of race, nationality, gender, and class in order to boost diversity and inclusion. And we have an outstanding group with us to discuss those questions. I'll begin with the introductions right here next to me. Her Excellency Dr. Atana Rizvanoli is Kosovo's Minister of Economy and a lecturer at Reinvest College in Pristina with a background in human capital and transition economies. Welcome to you. Great to have you with us. It's also a pleasure to welcome His Excellency Rafael Lotila. He is in his second term as Secretary of Energy for the Philippines and has also served several terms as Undersecretary at the National Economic and Development Authority. Welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Anant Wadiba is an energy data officer at Sustainable Energy for All. He's responsible for analyzing and planning, amongst other key areas, the demand of workers for green growth and energy transition investment plans. Great to have you with us with the overview. And finally, it's a pleasure to welcome our virtual guest on the panel. Damilola Asaleye is COO and co-founder of the Nigerian renewable energy company Ashdam Solar, which also provides worker training through its Solar Academy. And she also serves as vice president of the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria. And she's the founder of Girls and Women Technological Empowerment Organization, which is working to empower 6,000 girls and 300 women in clean energy. I'd like to start, as always, with a question to our audience to sample your insights. Our question is this: what are the biggest challenges in your country or organization when it comes to development of a larger and more inclusive skilled workforce for the energy transition? This is a work cloud, so please use your mobile phones to write in whatever word or words occurs to you in answer to this question, and we'll come back to the result a little bit later. And I'd like to start out with a focus on workforce demand and what all of you are projecting when you look toward the future. And I'll begin, if I may, with you, Ms. Rizvanoli. Kosovo's energy sector has traditionally been highly reliant on fossil fuels, especially coal, which has historically provided the vast majority of jobs in the energy industry. To what degree are you embarking on reskilling in order to manage long-term job loss as you transition out of fossil fuels? Here's your microphone.
Thank you. Indeed, our sector has traditionally been and still is predominated by coal. Around over 95% of electricity was produced from coal a few years ago. Now it's down to just over 90%, but it's still the predominant source. This meant that we had many workers in mining, but also operation of power plants, which tend to be male-dominated sectors. But on the other hand, we have a quickly emerging renewable energy sector, which is more attractive to both young men and women. We are, to some extent, fortunate in the sense that the average age in the coal sector is quite high. Therefore, we have a sort of natural phase out of coal and number of workers we expect to have over the next decades. While on the other hand, we have abundant skilled youth who are increasingly choosing to study STEM fields. This includes both men and women, I'm happy to say. And therefore, we see this transition happening more naturally. Of course, this does not mean that we will not need to invest a lot in human skill, in human capital development. And we are doing that at several levels by developing new programs, be it in vocational training, more short-term to deal with the needs right now, but also longer-term trainings and higher education programs to cater to the needs of the new, modern, dynamic sector, which is increasingly based on renewables.
Thank you very much. Let me ask Mr. Lotila to talk a little bit about the Philippines and opportunities there, because you are in fact one of the most promising emerging markets for renewables investments, and you're expecting considerable growth in both industry and employment opportunities in coming years. How are you assessing demand for skilled workers in the renewables sector, and what steps are you taking now to ensure that that demand can be met?
Well, thank you, Melinda. As you pointed out, the Philippines has a young population, and therefore our population is going to peak at around 135 million by 2055. And right now, we are at around 115 million in 2025. So it gives us some time where our productive workforce is going to be young and can have the opportunity. Now, however, if there is an opportunity for renewable energy jobs, with our target to have 50% of our power sector being provided from renewable energy in terms of energy by 2040, that opportunity can slip by. Our experience when it came to thermal plants before, that not only the EPC companies, but even the labor was provided not by Philippine nationals, but had to come from elsewhere. So it doesn't mean that if one has enough workforce, that if they are not trained or prepared to seize the opportunity, that they will actually benefit from the transition. So this is the challenge that is before us, and when we are working with not only with other government agencies. The natural tendency or the bias of many parents is for their children to take college degree courses. and they do not place much value on vocational and non-degree courses, for example. So there's a mindset that has to be changed, and that is a challenge and an opportunity. Of course, there are ways also of addressing that. They can enroll in degree courses, but it can be ladderized so that even if they finish only the first or second years, they can already be employed because they have the skills necessary for engaging in new opportunities in the jobs created by renewable energy. Now, for specific communities, for instance, we have an island that is the main coal mine for the Philippines, but fortunately is also the island which has the most favorable winds, so that both onshore and offshore wind can actually replace coal as the main employer. But that again takes time. So we are starting modestly with only 2 onshore turbines, but making sure that the island population also grows with this.
And you are reskilling the workers on the island who would have otherwise been working in the coal industry to essentially, yeah.
So that's the condition that we are imposing upon the coal mine service contractor, that they should provide for the transition not only of the working population, but also the entire community, which is highly dependent on coal.
Very interesting, thank you. A good reminder there about the long lead times that are involved
Which,
here.
By the way, also points out to the fact that the transition can't be a short one.
Right.
We have to take into account that communities would have to make the adjustment and at a measured pace.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, and we'll come back to that point. Let me go over to Nigeria now, and Damilola Asaleye. I hope that you can hear us well. I know you've had a few technical issues, but it looks like the connection's good now. You have been a strong energy advocate for clean energy solutions and fossil fuel independence in Nigeria. So tell us about the current state of workforce development in the renewables sector in your country, please.
Can you hear me? Can you
Yes.
confirm you can hear me?
We hear you well, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon from Nigeria. So the current state of renewable energy workforce in Nigeria, I would say we are at our fundamental and growing stage. Right now, a lot of people want to acquire the knowledge. A lot of people are in the industry now that maybe they hear about renewable energy and they want to be part of the renewable energy and they don't have the skills. But as that is, a lot of people also realize that for them to excel in the industry, they need to acquire the right skills, and not just skills that can be used locally, but skills that can be recognized and utilized internationally. So right now, there are several programs, there are organizations like Coren that offers certification in renewable energy with training partners like my organization, Ashton Solar. So with this kind of training, the level of expertise of the industry is growing. It was very minimal before, but it is growing rapidly. A lot of people now see the reason for them to upskill and know that if they don't upskill, if they don't get these certifications, if they don't get the required skills and knowledge, then some opportunities will not get to them, both nationally and globally. There are some projects in Nigeria right now that if you want to do those projects, you actually have to have certifications in the areas of renewable energy. So, and because of that, there is rapid increase in access in the need and the enthusiasm of people to get trained in renewable energy.
I mentioned when I introduced you, I'm not sure whether you were able to hear the introduction because that's when the technology was a bit shaky, but I mentioned the fact that you are very engaged in seeking to empower women and girls. So tell us a little bit about what share of that potential workforce in renewables actually would be women and girls. Is this something of interest to them? And are they being educated in a way that would give them the basis that they would need?
Okay, so I realized a very, very big gap which exists, which has been in existence and is still in existence. And that big gap is very small women are in the technological space. Very small percentage of women. If you go to universities in Nigeria and you can see 100 students, and out of these 100 in engineering students, out of these 100, you probably see maybe one woman or two women out of 100. And this is something that is very, very rampant. And it is something that we are solving. Right now, when we have women in energy, we have a lot of our women that are actually in the soft skills, in the administrative aspects. So you can see a renewable energy company, and if they have 40% of that organization as women, you really see one woman as part of the technical space. You probably see the woman as a salesperson or a front desk person. It's very, very rare to have women in the field. But this is a gap that we are solving right now, and because of that, in my organization, we do a lot of trainings for women in technical space. Women, we have a program that we call Solar Queen Technical Training, and the aim of this training is to ensure that women have the right skills. Women are accepted in the technical space, not just in the administrative aspects. And even if you are in the administrative aspect, there are a lot of things that you need to know as a technical person, as an administrative person. There are a lot of technicalities that you still need to know. So we organize trainings that ensures that all the technical aspects that you need to know, you are able to acquire those skills. And then we also have special training for young girls, because we realize that this problem, there's a root cause. And the root cause is right from the foundation of probably when in Nigeria we call them secondary schools. So when you're in grade schools, and at that time, that is when we decide what we want to be. That is when we decide, oh, I want to be an engineer. I want to work in the energy sector. I want to work in the administrative sector. So what we do is that we go to schools, we go to secondary schools, and we mentor girls to be able to embrace STEM. We mentor girls to be able to embrace STEM. We also have boot camps where girls, we have them in for 1 week, for 2 weeks, and we introduce them to basic things in renewable energy, basic as connecting solar panels to batteries. Girls that some of them are from rural locations, bring them into city, and we introduce them to technology. We introduce them to climate change, introduction to climate change, mitigation. We introduce them to ICT because it is an encompassing. There are skills that you have to right from a young age, or you have to get introduced to right from a young age, so that by the time you are going to university, you can decide and say, oh, because I was introduced at a young age to these skills, I know and I have the confidence that I can actually excel in the technical space. And the phobia of, oh, I'm a girl, I can't do this. I'm a girl, the norm, the society is telling me I can't be a mechanical engineer, I can't be an astronaut, I can't be this, I can't be that. But because I've been introduced at some programs, I've seen people, I've touched this, I've done this. Because of that, we see a lot of girls actually transitioning and embracing. Like, we have testimony from girls that were in our boot camps, and by the time they wanted to go to universities, they are doing science subjects and they are embracing, and they are even in the renewable energy space right now. Some of them, actually, there was a particular girl that I started mentoring when she was 17. By the time she went to university, she studied ICT. But despite the fact that she studied ICT, she started a renewable energy company right from university. She started a renewable energy right from university, and now she's doing amazing.
So the making it very concrete, making it touchable, feelable, in order to really be able to give those young ladies, those young women, true choices by the time that they get to university. Thank you very much for that. Let me go over to Anant Wadhwa now. And Sustainable Energy for All helps countries to develop tailored energy transition plans that align workforce needs with their climate and energy goals. You quantitatively assess country-specific workforce demand up to 2050, I believe it is, in some cases even up to 2060. Can you tell us, based on your analysis, what job roles are going to be most critical for the energy transition in coming decades? Where do you see the biggest gaps? And also, where do you see similarities between countries?
Thank you for the question. And before I go into, what would be the jobs needed, let me just give a brief overview of how do we actually do that. So when we talk about energy transition and investment planning, we talk about the transition, which is the technical part of it. Then we talk about the investment, which is the financing part of it. And then we talk about the socioeconomic, where the jobs, the water use, how the environment's going to benefit from them, that comes in. So when we talk just about the technical part, we are moving away from coal. We've heard, coal is playing a big role, but we need to move away from that as soon as possible. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take 15, 20, 25 years, maybe 40 years in some countries. We need to accelerate, but that's where it stands as of now. So we've got renewable energy engineers. If you want people to actually install solar, you need GIS people who are going to figure out what is the best location for me to install a rooftop solar, install a utility scale solar, what is the best output, which are the regions that are going to give me the best output for your country. So we need those people. Then we need the installers who are actually going to go out in the field, install the solar panels. Then we need electricians that are going to deal with the internal wiring of that area. Then you need obviously grid management people. We're talking about renewables coming into the grid, and I think if we just followed up on the presentation that was going on parallel to us in Europasal, it was a delegation from Cyprus, and he said that the grid is not ready to have all the renewable in Cyprus. So obviously that means that we need to modernize our grid. We need people for that. We need AI people for that. We need people that can work out how do we have either grid densification, either grid extension. If nothing's going to work, mini grids, solar home systems, all of these, this is just the technical part. I think then we have the energy efficiency specialists. So when we talk about energy transition, it just doesn't mean moving away from coal. It also means making your buildings more energy efficient. So we need people who know how to retrofit. We need energy auditors. So this is just the technical side of it. Obviously, there's money involved, so we need finance guys. Then we have the green hydrogen sustainable fuel people that are going to work into how all of these subsidies, incentives are going to feed into how hydrogen plays a key role in moving into, I would say, a better world. I won't just say a green world, but a better world, better for all of us. Then we've got the battery people, who are going to work on how can we recycle the batteries, what is the life cycle of the batteries or all of the equipment that we're using, so that we stick to that principle of reusing the components, so that all of the countries are not dependent on just a couple of, handful of countries in the world, where you need to have their support in order for your transition to work. Then, obviously, we've talked about the finance. We've talked about, there's regulatory people, who are going to be the ones making policies or enforcing the regulations in the country. And when all of this is done, then we come about the socio-economic impact, where we actually need to talk about the community-driven entrepreneurs. You cannot switch from I would just take an example of India. You cannot ask any Indian household to just switch from gas to electric cooking. It's just not going to happen. It is going to take time. You need at least 5 to 10 years. You need awareness. You need the community's people to aware them, to encourage them to switch their fuel. I think this is the same problem that we have been facing in Ghana, in Kenya, most of the sub-Saharan African countries, that they're not willing to just give up coal or biofuel as the fuel source and rather just switch to electric cooking. We've got private companies trying to work on that, but yet those are the people that we're going to need. When we talk about similarities, I think all of the global south countries, so we've got around 90% of the youth, that's around roughly 1.8 billion of the 2 billion youth that we have right now, that is in the global south. These are the people that are going to have our jobs in the next 15, 20 years, maybe 30 years for some of us. But the goal is that we should empower those people today. Let's take them today with the transition so that, once after 15 years we give them, we hand over everything to them. Then they're not confused by what they need to do now. So it should be a seamless transition. So when we talk about the similarities, it's the foundational workforce that is needed. With all of the jobs that I just mentioned, these are the people that we need to start training now so that once we say, all right, 2040, this country needs to switch, they are ready. They have all the plans, they have all the technical skills, and they're in line to say, all right, I can do that. But if we just keep on waiting, now first let's focus about planning everything correctly, then we'll talk about training them. I don't think that's going to happen that way. Even in Germany, we're facing Fachkräftemangel. That's the term that we've been using for the past 2 years. If you go to Africa, if you go to India, if you go to Latin American countries, or Asia for that matter, there's never been this term ever used, Fachkräftemangel. The youth is there.
Labor shortages, just for those who don't speak German.
That's labor shortage. The youth is there. We just need to train them. We just need to incentivize them and bring them into this cycle of energy transition. So that's the similarity, I would say. And when we're talking about, and again, one more thing for the similarities, the grid modernization. That is an important thing. Even if we talk about Philippines or Indonesia, which is quite heavily coal-dependent, both of them economies, when we move to a renewables-based economy, we would need grid. We need to transport energy from where it is produced to where it's actually needed. And moving on to, I would say, just the differences, that's where the developed or the emerging economies and the developed nations differ. The developed nations tend to go more towards, high qualified, AI-driven technological skills. They can just do it. But when we talk about the economies like Sierra Leone, like Barbados, we need to start from the ground up. We need to start building capacity for every single thing now. Because we're not talking about just energy transition, we're also talking about energy access and their growth while transiting to the cleaner economy.
Thank you very much. Let us do a second round of discussion, taking a bit of a deeper dive on diversity issues. And I'll start with Minister Rizvanoli, if I may. The Just and Equitable Transition Project is a key initiative that seeks to equip Kosovo's workforce with the skills that will be needed for the energy transition. How are you involving people from diverse backgrounds in that program? What strategies can help employers to maintain inclusive and equitable working conditions over the long term?
So thank you. This specific program that you mentioned is being designed at this stage, but we've had other experiences over the last years. One problem in the energy sector, but which is also globally an issue, is the gender gap. And this is something that we have taken very seriously. For instance, in our energy strategy, which was adopted a few years ago by our parliament, we have an objective there to increase almost threefold the share of women in the energy sector. Currently, it was assessed to be at around 9% or less. And with renewable energy, this is already changing inherently with these new occupations, new technologies, which are attractive for everyone. And I think making sure that young men and women and youth of different backgrounds have access to this information on what the up and coming jobs and high-paid positions and attractive positions for professional development will be is extremely important. I think we tend to neglect that sometimes, just letting people know of the possibilities and what is coming will have a huge impact, and then they will also to some extent find the way. Making sure that everyone has equal access or equitable access, to be more precise, to programs, be it training programs, be it internships and scholarships, is something that we take very seriously. And we've had several programs targeting women, specifically women in energy. We had, for instance, scholarship schemes where 25 young women went to the US to do associate's degrees in various renewable energy and adjacent occupations. And we've had internship schemes dedicated to women, both in the private and in the public sector, so both in companies and publicly owned companies, as well as in the ministry. And I'm happy to say that some of them, a significant number of them, share of them, actually remained in the institutions where they were placed. We are also looking at new ways in which we can make the private sector and the public sector, employers in the energy sector, more aware of gender specifics and more, for instance, how, and they're going to be trained, for instance, on how to publish ads for positions that are in a gender-neutral way, or ensuring that women are attracted to apply, or how to better respond in the workplace to the needs of women, be it through infrastructure or extra services that may be provided to make these workplaces more attractive to women. And I'm happy to say that we have this trend whereby this predominantly male sector is changing, and we can see it also in newer institutions and newer occupation. So as opposed to, for instance, KEC, which is our largest power producer from coal, where still less than 30% of the workforce are women. But I'm happy to say that of the women that are hired in KEC, this is a 60-year-old publicly owned enterprise, about a quarter of them were hired in the last 2 years, which I think is an indication of how things are changing. And this is even, and for the first time, for instance, we had a woman working in one of the coal mine technical positions. For the first time, we had a 50-something-year-old woman who applied and got the job just a few months ago, which was very inspiring to see. But on the other hand, in younger institutions and in younger occupations, like you mentioned energy efficiency, for instance, earlier, we've designed in partnership with the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Energy, in a partnership with University of Pristina, we designed a training for and certification scheme for energy efficiency auditors. And here about 30% of the auditors are women. And similarly, and even better actually, in the Kosovo Energy Efficiency Fund, which is an institution that was established 5-6 years ago, just over 50% of the workforce are women. This is both in technical leadership and managerial and administrative positions, so they are not They are not concentrated only in administration, and there is no divide. So these kind of developments make me very optimistic that things are changing, and as renewable energy tends to be identified and tends to be higher skilled, and as grids are more digitalized, and then you have ICT-related, cybersecurity-related occupations, so these are increasingly, women are finding it more attractive to join the energy sector, and this is, I think, moving in the right direction.
And Secretary Lotila, if we look at the Philippines, the share, at least I think the most recent numbers are for 2021, 16% of the overall energy workforce in Philippines was female. That's only about half the share in renewable energy worldwide. It's still also significantly lower than the traditional energy sector worldwide. There it's about nearly a quarter of the workforce is female. So what are you doing to boost employment of women in the energy sector overall and in renewables in particular? And how do you also reach out to indigenous communities in your country to try to promote their inclusion in this future energy sector?
Thank you, Melinda. As our colleagues here have emphasized, the trend towards cleaner technologies have also brought about a change in the kind of skills and training that are required of the workforce. And these, from the traditional, for example, you don't see women in coal mining or in the operation of thermal plants, not in the same numbers but when we go into renewable energy and other cleaner technologies, then engineers, whether they're men or women, have equal opportunities to engage not only in planning or in regulatory work, but actually even in the operation and monitoring of power plants. Mm-hmm. So it's a change that we are taking advantage of, that in this manner you can have more opportunities actually being created for women as well. And in the case of indigenous peoples, the fact that renewable energy sources are usually found in regions where there are indigenous people's rights, then it's a way of actually not only engaging them, but taking advantage of the opportunities. For example, one looks at the maintenance of the watershed for hydro areas. It's one which the indigenous community itself knows best, and therefore they can be directly engaged in the protection of the watershed, and for which the community would be compensated for playing that particular role. And then it introduces you into, or the communities to other opportunities besides protection of the environment and the watershed. And as for the auditors, the regulators and the planners that we need, many of our workforce in that area are actually women, and here we look to private sector to be the main drivers as well, because in the Philippines.
Do you try to incentivize that, dealing with the private sector directly, or how do you?
Well, we do.
What do you mean by look to?
We do encourage them, but you see, in the case of, let me mention an anecdote. This is not in the energy sector, but would have parallels. In the shipbuilding industry in the Philippines, they found that women are better as welders because they have a soft hand, and they found that to be more accurate. And that would apply as well to the building, for example, of turbines and platforms for offshore wind and so on. But there was a downside in the retention of these female employees. We, in one shipbuilding facility, we had almost 100% female workforce as welders. But eventually, most of them got married to the engineers and the supervisors, and who were foreigners, and that caused a decline in their participation in the workforce. But as far as opportunities, there are, and we look forward to more of our women taking advantage of these opportunities.
Thank you. Let me ask Damilola Asaliye if you could share a few best practice examples of the benefits that diversity delivers when we boost the share of women and girls, or when we boost the share of other underrepresented communities. What changes in a workforce?
Oh, thank you. So, can you confirm? Can you hear me, please?
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Can you confirm?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to confirm. Okay, so when we have more women on the table, a lot of things changes. There has been a research on when we have about 50% of women represented in the leadership of renewable energy companies, it actually increases the profitability of that organization. Because women, we are very, very diversified. We are able to fit in at different roles. And the way we also think, when we are thinking of homes, we are able to think of work, we're able to multitask. And we're able to bring that ideas and our diversity into organizations. So when women are part of the table, when women are part of organizations, a lot of things changes. And because we are natural mothers also, naturally we are mothers, so we are able to nurture different categories of generation. Let's say there's an organization that has the Gen Z, the millennials, the Generation X. As women, we are able to actually nurture all these generations and know how to relate individually with this generation in such a way that it brings growth into the organization. Now, women, we are naturally energy managers also. Let's go to rural areas. In the rural areas, you see that the women, they are the ones that are managing cooking, managing how to use fuel, be it fossil fuel or cooking with three stone pots, stoves, or whatever energy source at all. Women are the natural energy managers. So now, when women are actually involved in the energy process, in the decision-making in energy, in these rural communities, we have seen that everything just changes. Like there is better energy management when the women understand the need of the energy. There is better energy management. There is growth. There is even increase in revenue. Because in these communities, in rural communities that we go to, we see that women, they are actively involved in the economic value, in the economy of the societies. So there is increase, like there's a rapid increase in revenue because the women are actually involved in decision making. The women are actually involved in energy decisions, in also deciding, the kind of renewable energy or the kind of energy that is being brought into the communities. So everything just changes, and it changes averagely by 50%. Averagely by 50% based on our engagement, both in the training aspect and also involving women in rural education projects that we do. So we see a lot of changes overall.
Thank you very much. So not only good for society, but also good for business. Anand Wadhwa, Sustainable Energy for All works a good deal with countries that have the greatest energy access gaps and also those that are most vulnerable to climate change. And those are precisely the countries where marginalized groups often face high barriers to inclusion in the workforce overall, but also in energy. So how can job creation models in these countries be designed to address inequalities and ensure the maximum possible inclusion in new employment, for example, in renewables?
Thank you. Thank you for the SE for All's background as well. So let me just give a quick overview of the work that we've already done. So we worked with the government of Ghana, Kenya, Sierra Leone, and Barbados. So in Ghana, we saw there was almost 400,000 jobs that could be created if Ghana were to go net zero by 2060. For Kenya, this was 2050, around 500,000 jobs. For Sierra Leone, we're not talking about a transition. As you mentioned, there's a huge energy access gap. We're talking about a green growth. So we say by 2050, when there would be a net zero growth for the country, there would be around 29,000 jobs. And for Barbados, Her Excellency Prime Minister Motley just released the Barbados Energy Transition and Investment Plan last week in Barbados. We estimate around 1,500 jobs. So you can see there's 1,500 on one side, and then there's 500,000 on one side. So the population of Barbados is just 300,000, less than 300,000. And if we talk about Ghana or Kenya, it's significantly higher. So we talk about all of these jobs being created, but we need to figure out what do we do with the jobs that are being lost. You know, once we move away from fossil fuels, so from coal, the people who are actually in the mining pits, their jobs are going to be gone. We need somebody else is going to take a new job, which is, for renewable onshore wind, offshore wind, installing solar panels, etc. So what we've done is we've taken into account what would be the net job creation for all of these countries based on the socioeconomic modeling that we do as a part of this whole process. And as you said, there's always been a disparity between the people in the rural communities and people in urban communities. The quality of education is vastly different when we talk about these countries and specifically these communities. And as you mentioned about the indigenous communities where there might not be formal education always present or formal source of education not always present, how do we manage those gaps? So I think first I would like to talk about what are the barriers for the marginalized group, be it the rural communities, be it the communities which have higher rates of poverty or the indigenous communities. I think one of the key barriers that we see right now is the lack of educational facilities. So either they need to move to a big city, then get some education and then try to get a job in even better city or even bigger city somewhere in the country, which then leaves them, kind of unconnected with the roots of where they are, where they started, and where they want to go. So I think that the way to establish that or re-establish that link is making knowledge accessible, making education accessible for those communities where it's needed the most. You've got different ways. You've got incentivization. We've got public-private partnerships. We can't just put the onus entirely on the government. It is wrong. We cannot put the entire onus on the private sector to do all of that, which is also wrong. So all of these things, all of these incentives need to go hand in hand. These policies need to go hand in hand. And I must applaud Her Excellency for these programs in Kosovo that are leading to this change. Mm-hmm. Every small step matters because it is not a sprint, it is a marathon. Right. So we are not here for a short time, we are here for a good time. So I think that should be the goal that we should be focusing on. Then we have the issue of informal labor markets. So especially in ASEAN countries and African countries, there's a lot of informal markets where there's no regulation at all. So, somebody would not have any form of education, but they're still working. Let me give an example. As an air conditioning or refrigeration technician, they don't have formal training. They are on the job with somebody as an assistant, as a helper. A few years later, they have their own shop. There's nobody regulating if you're allowed to run that shop. And then some accident happened. They're not the best servicing practices that are there providing the customers. So these are the things that we need to tackle from the grassroots level. So we can't just say, that starts from the universities and then come down. We need to start at the base level and then start going up. So in Barbados, this is exactly what we did. So we identified these are the jobs that we need to have within the next 15 years, or 10 years now, because Barbados plans to go net zero by 2035, which is an amazing target. We looked at all the universities, so starting from the basic level, primary, secondary, middle, higher education, universities, college, tertiary education, vocational institutes. Where are they located? What is the population density of it? What is the demographics of that place? And then you add the gender split into that, and then you can see that most of the places in the university are traditionally, occupied by men in these traditionally male-dominated fields. So we are promoting women in STEM. So we've got a program that supports in Panama, so in Latin American countries, and in Africa, that promotes women in STEM. So these are some of the things that we can do and we have done, and they have proved to be beneficial for the country, that would have not just the gender balance and equality, but also the inclusion of under-marginalized groups in the bigger energy transition.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Let us get a quick look at the result of our Slido question that we did not yet see. So here we asked, what are the biggest challenges in your country when it comes to development of a larger and more inclusive skilled workforce for the energy transition? And the big ones here, gender bias, as we have mentioned several times, money, lack of financing, education and training. Then we have a little bit smaller print, as it were, issues like systemic inequalities, sexism, so feeding into the gender bias, awareness, structural discrimination, administration, development, I assume vet development means for veterans?
Education and training.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Vocational education and training, exactly. Thank you very much. And vested interests, bureaucratic procedures, technical capacity support, standards, regulatory frameworks, prioritization. Let me kind of wrap all of those into one last question to all of you with the request for brief answers, if you would. What we're seeing here is, for this marathon that we're talking about, political will is going to be needed, and cooperation between the public and private sectors to address a lot of these barriers. So to each of you, the question, what for you is the top priority looking forward when it comes to public-private collaboration to address barriers and bring them down so that we can have a more inclusive, skilled workforce for the transition? Minister?
Yes, fortunately, the private sector we've seen in Kosovo, but also in the region, has moved forward, and it has moved forward faster than the public sector and regulation. What we are trying to do is streamline all of this, to integrate the best practices, to involve the private sector in the development of the courses. That, on the other hand, is very helpful for us, because having the private sector with experience, they already know what is missing and they already know the gaps in the system. So what we're trying to do now is set up the licensing, certification schemes, and ensuring that these help to make the system safer and better, and on the other hand, are not an excessive burden on the private sector, is, I think, a key challenge moving forward.
Thank you. Secretary Lotila?
Along those lines, we are working with the private sector, but here there is room for international cooperation and partnership, because we do see that while we need our own workforce for our energy transition, There is willingness on the part of the Philippines as part of its contribution to the global transition to provide part of that of the human resource requirements for the international markets as well.
Let's remember that your country is one of the biggest labor exporters in the world.
True, but what we'd like to, precisely because of that, there are lessons to be learned. That, for example, the local companies in the Philippines need to grow, and the individual workers would have to grow with the companies. So we need not send individuals, but rather we can send an entire team, and they will therefore benefit from the value add that their services will bring to the country. And whenever there is a slack in, for example, in work opportunities in the country, we fill them elsewhere, and then they take turns. So the net gain to the country in terms of the human resource will be much less than if we train them, then we spend for their training, then they go abroad and we lose them completely. Right. So it's not a fair system.
Yeah.
But here, if we cooperate among ourselves, then we will be able to have a truly just transition.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I'll go over to Nigeria and Damilola Asaliye, if you would. Same question to you. The most crucial priority that you see for public sector, private sector collaboration to truly put into place the kind of skilled and diverse workforce that we're going to need?
Okay, so at my side, I would say for public sector and private sector, it is very, very important that we have workable policies and cooperation from the private sector with the public sector, while the public sector should actually develop the policies that will ensure that the private sector are able to implement. And these policies, when we have them issued, we should ensure that they are gender inclusive. If we look at the result, we see that gender bias is very, very shouting, is very paramount there. So our policies should ensure that there's gender inclusiveness. And when we say include, it should be implementable. It shouldn't be just by paper. We should ensure that strategies to implement the gender inclusiveness is in place. Workable strategies to ensure that those implementation are able to be done. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. And finally, to Anant Wadhwa, and one thing that I might guess you would share is the importance of data for informed policymaking, because you've shared a lot of very valuable data with you, and clearly that's a key role that Sustainable Energy for All can play. But perhaps you want to pick up that ball and add to it.
Thank you. No, I was actually going to start just by saying that before we do all of this, public and private partnerships, we need to take a step back and use data to actually see what is that's needed in that specific context, either for the country or for the state, or we can go down to whatever level that we want. But I would like to add, just on that, we always talk about P, so public-private partnerships. Let's add another P. Let's add public-private philanthropic partnerships, where we can have all the money, all the legislative action, all the private sector experience, leverage that using data, using tools. We've got AI. That's not going anywhere. That's our reality, and that's our future. Let's leverage all of that to give us a just and inclusive future. I think I'll leave it at that.
We have one more minute. Anybody could add a final closing word if they have one. Please, Secretary, you're looking very expectant, but...
Well, just on the partnerships, I think that as we have learned, for example, in our sea-based workers who are in most of the European fleets, what the European companies have done is to invest in the training and the schooling of the workforce, even at university or pre-university levels. So that has meant a lot in terms of giving people opportunities where otherwise they would be unable to do so. And that's what we would like to see as well in the energy transition.
And that, of course, picks up on the barrier that many people named, namely funding and money as key barriers. Thank you so much to all of you for being with us and sharing your insights and experience in how we build that inclusive and skilled workforce that we need to realize our ambitious tripling up renewable energy goal. Let's give them a warm round of applause, please.